The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I even picked it up. Gold foil, heavy cardstock, the kind of paper that whispers expensive before you even open it. It was for Brooke's housewarming party, her summer solstice soiree, as the invitation grandly put it. My sister had just bought a penthouse apartment downtown, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that probably cost more than I made in 5 years. My first instinct, as it always was with family events involving Brooke, was a heavy, dragging dread, like trying to swim through thick mud. I pictured the scene, the air thick with the scent of money and unattainable glamour, Brooke dazzling at the center of it all, and me, standing awkwardly by the side, the quiet backdrop to her brilliant performance. Being the other daughter isn't something that happened overnight. It was a role I grew into year after year, party after party. Brooke was the star, beautiful, charming, effortlessly popular, always knowing the right thing to say to the right person. Our parents, Diane and Robert, adored her. Mom, especially, lived for appearances. Her nails were always perfect, her smile wide and practiced, and she prided herself on raising 2 accomplished daughters. But in her eyes, only one had truly succeeded. I was the sensitive one, the quiet one, the one who liked to build things with her hands instead of networking, who preferred dusty books to designer bags. After my divorce, raising Caleb on my own, working 2 part-time jobs that barely covered the bills, a baker at a local shop in the mornings, admin for a chiropractor in the afternoons, that gap widened into a chasm. My life wasn't shiny or loud. It was a constant, quiet hustle. I wasn't failing, not in my own estimation, but I certainly wasn't living the life my parents or Brooke understood or valued. There were so many little moments that solidified my place. Like the time Mom Diane, after I finally managed to buy my small fixer-upper house in a modest neighborhood, sighed and said, "Well, it's cozy. At least it's a start." Or when Brooke, discussing career paths, airily suggested I should find something more stable than my little gigs, completely missing the point that those little gigs paid the bills and kept Caleb fed and clothed. Dad Robert rarely said anything cruel, but he rarely said anything supportive either. When conversations turned to my life, he'd often just fade into the background, checking his watch or getting a refill on his drink. His silence was louder than any criticism. I remembered a particularly awkward Thanksgiving a few years back. Aunt Grace, Mom's sister, who meant well but was always slightly out of touch, asked loudly across the table if I was still doing my little candle-making hobby, like it was something cute I did in my spare time between real jobs. I just smiled and nodded, the familiar heat rising in my neck. Aunt Grace wasn't mean, not truly, but she was part of the chorus that just didn't get it. None of them did. They saw my struggle as a personal failing, not a circumstance I was navigating with quiet determination. Picking up the invitation, I felt that familiar wave of anxiety. Why subject myself to it? But then I looked at Caleb, building a magnificent, lopsided tower of Legos on the rug. He's 9 now, smart and sensitive, and he sees more than I sometimes give him credit for. He sees my long hours, my tired smiles, but he also sees the effort, the dedication. I didn't want him to just see me as the family's quiet disappointment. I wanted him to see strength. And I had something else. Something I'd been working on, pouring every spare moment and ounce of energy into for over 2 years. Something real. A quiet success built brick by painstaking brick, far away from their gaze and judgment. A few weeks ago, a major milestone had been reached. And looking at that fancy invitation, a different feeling began to mix with the dread. A quiet, simmering resolve. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop being the quiet one. I decided I would go. And I wouldn't just bring myself and Caleb. I would bring a statement. Preparing for the party felt different this time. It wasn't just about trying to look presentable enough not to embarrass Mom Diane. It was about presenting myself exactly as I was, with quiet dignity. I chose a simple, well-fitting dress I hadn't worn in ages, classic and understated. I did my makeup carefully, not to transform myself, but to feel put together. I dressed Caleb in his nicest shirt and pants, the ones we'd found on clearance last year. He was excited, mostly about seeing his cousins and the promise of fancy snacks. He was blissfully unaware of the subtle social battlefield we were about to enter. We drove downtown in my reliable, but far from luxurious sedan. As we got closer to Brooke's building, the cars got progressively fancier. I bypassed the valet, finding a spot 3 blocks away, the walk feeling like a deliberate step outside their immediate sphere. Brooke's penthouse was exactly what you'd expect. Sweeping views of the city skyline through immense windows, minimalist furniture that probably cost a fortune, contemporary art on the walls. The air hummed with conversation and the clinking of glasses. Waitstaff circulated with trays of appetizers I couldn't pronounce. Everyone looked polished and successful, like they'd stepped out of a magazine. We navigated the crowd, the feeling of being an outsider settling over me like a shroud. People gave polite hellos, some with that slightly tilted head that signals pity or confusion. "Scarlett." "Wow, you made it," a distant cousin Miles said with a smirk, clearly surprised. Miles was always part of Brooke's orbit, quick with a joke that landed at someone else's expense. I spotted Brooke across the room, a radiant figure in a glittering cocktail dress, holding court surrounded by friends and admirers. She saw me approaching and gave me a quick, somewhat forced smile. "Scarlett, you came," she said, her eyes doing a quick sweep of my simple dress. "And Caleb, look how big you are. Go find your cousins." She gave me a brief, cheek-brushing hug that felt entirely performative, then turned back to her group, already moving on. Mom Diane rushed over, fussing slightly about where I parked, reminding me to mingle, while Dad Robert offered a quiet nod before drifting off to talk to someone else. Caleb, thankfully distracted by the prospect of finding his cousins, tugged me towards a less crowded area. I got him a glass of water, the only non-alcoholic option readily available, and watched him settle in, feeling that familiar pull of wanting to protect him from the undercurrents of this world. As the evening progressed, the subtle jab started. Aunt Grace came over, genuinely asking about Caleb, but then pivoted to me. "Still doing that creative thing, dear? It's so nice you have a little hobby to keep you busy." Her tone was kind, but condescending, implying it was just a time filler, not a livelihood. Cousin Miles sidled up at one point while Brooke was within earshot, asking loudly if I was still looking for a real job, or if I needed a little help to get by. He chuckled, and Brooke shot him a look that was half warning, half encouragement. I kept my smile fixed, deflecting the comments, focusing on Caleb. My heart ached a little for the boy, sensing the tension even if he didn't fully grasp the words. I saw him watching me, his eyes mirroring my own quiet determination. Brooke got up to give a speech. She thanked everyone for celebrating her success, her beautiful new home, her amazing friends, and her supportive parents. She spoke glowingly about her career, her future plans, the people who believed in her. My name wasn't mentioned, not even in passing. It was like I wasn't even in the room. Then, she transitioned to a topic that made my ears perk up. She talked about her next big dream, starting her own high-end line of luxury home goods. She lamented how difficult it was to get the initial funding, even for someone with her connections. "It just goes to show," she said, with a sigh that sounded more like a humble brag, "that even with all the right pieces, you still need that big break, that major investment to really launch. It's tough out there, even for us." A few people nodded in agreement. My internal reaction was complicated. Part of me felt the familiar sting of being invisible, but another part felt a surge of quiet power. Because while Brooke was talking about needing a big break and waiting for an investment, I had already built exactly what she was describing. For the past 2.5 years, I had been pouring every ounce of energy outside my paid jobs into my business. It started small, making high-quality, artisanal candles and unique home decor pieces by hand in my tiny kitchen after Caleb was asleep. I taught myself everything: sourcing ethical materials, developing scents, branding, photography, building an online store from scratch, managing social media. There were so many nights I worked until 2 or 3 a.m., fueled by cold coffee and sheer will. Months where I barely broke even. Moments of crushing doubt where I wondered if I was crazy, if Aunt Grace was right, and it was just a little hobby. But I kept going. I connected with a community of online makers, learned about digital marketing, experimented endlessly. And then, about 8 months ago, One of my posts saw a video showing the intricate process of carving a unique candle design went unexpectedly viral. Orders flooded in. I couldn't keep up. I reinvested every penny, scaled production, hiring a few local women for help, and refined my brand. A few months later, I was contacted by Olivia, a representative from a major e-commerce platform that supports independent artists. She saw the potential for massive growth and offered a partnership deal that included significant investment and access to their infrastructure. The paperwork had finalized just last month. My business wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a registered LLC, profitable and poised for national reach. The initial payout from the partnership was substantial, enough to pay off my debts, secure Caleb's future for years, and give me something I hadn't had in a long time: financial security and genuine pride. And I hadn't told my family a word. Not because I wanted to surprise them, though that was a small, tempting part of it, but because I didn't want their performative pride, their sudden interest. I wanted my success to be mine, built on my terms, proven through work, not announced for applause. But hearing Brooke talk about needing funding, needing a break, needing someone to believe in her, while simultaneously dismissing my entire existence and effort, something snapped. Not in anger, but in clarity. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about that narrative they'd all created and perpetuated. And standing there, watching Caleb look up at me with worried eyes, I knew I had to dismantle it. The moment came during the gift acknowledgement part. People brought up beautifully wrapped boxes. Brooke owed and awed over designer bags, jewelry, vacation vouchers. Then, she gestured towards me. "And I think, Scarlett, well, did you bring anything, dear?" she asked, her tone sweet but laced with condescending amusement. I told everyone not to worry about gifts, but look at all this generosity. People turned to look at me. I felt the familiar flush of embarrassment, but it was quickly replaced by a cool resolve. Caleb looked up, his lower lip trembling slightly. This was it. I walked forward, the quietest person in the room, and stood before Brooke. She looked mildly surprised I'd approached, a smirk playing on her lips. She probably expected me to stammer an excuse. Instead, I smiled. Not a nervous smile, but a calm, steady one that felt entirely new. "Actually, I did," I said, my voice clear and steady. I reached into the small clutch I was carrying and pulled out a single, plain white envelope. It looked ridiculously insignificant next to the piles of glittering gifts. I handed it to her. "For you, Brooke." She took it, eyebrows raised, a smirk evident now. "Oh, a card," she said, waving it lightly as if it were a napkin. A few guests chuckled nervously. Guess she couldn't afford wrapping paper, Cousin Miles muttered loudly enough for a few people to hear. More nervous laughter. My stomach tightened, but my gaze didn't waver from Brooke. She ripped open the envelope with exaggerated flourish, clearly expecting a funny card or maybe a small handmade item she could politely set aside. But then her eyes scanned the contents. First, the check. Then, as she pulled it out, a folded letter. Her eyes widened. The smirk vanished. Her face drained of color so rapidly it was like watching a screen go black. Her hand holding the envelope trembled. She looked at the check, then the letter, then the check again. She swayed slightly. The laughter died. The room fell silent. Everyone was watching her, then looking at me, then back at her, trying to understand what could possibly cause such a reaction. Brooke's mouth parted, but no sound came out. She took a step back, stumbled slightly, and sank onto the edge of a nearby sofa, the envelope clutched in her hand as if it might bite her. The silence thickened. You could hear the distant city noise through the windows, the hum of the refrigerator. No one moved. No one spoke. All eyes were on Brooke, and then, inevitably, they turned to me. For the first time in my life, the collective gaze of my family didn't make me feel small. It made me feel seen. And powerful. Because I knew exactly what was in that envelope, and I knew the story it told. Brooke finally managed a shaky whisper. What is this?" Her voice was raw, stripped of its usual polish. Uncle Thomas, a calm, steady presence in the family who usually stayed out of the drama, stepped forward slightly. "Brooke, what is it?" She looked down at the check again, her hand still trembling. It's, it's a check, she mumbled, her voice barely audible. From Scarlett. Cousin Miles asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Brooke nodded, still staring at the paper. How much? Someone else asked, a voice from the back. Brooke hesitated, then slowly, as if in a trance, she held up the check so a few people nearby could see. A wave of gasps swept through the front of the crowd, rippling backward as people strained to see the number. $40,000. Clear as day, written out neatly. Silence again, but different this time. It was a stunned, questioning silence. $40,000. From Scarlett? The one who struggled, the one who came empty-handed? What is this for? Mom Diane asked, her voice sharp with bewildered shock. Her perfect composure had fractured. Dad Robert, who had been pretending to be engrossed in his phone, was now staring at me, his jaw slack. I stepped forward, my voice steady and clear. It's a check, I said, stating the obvious. From me. To Brooke. I looked at my sister, still stunned on the sofa. You were just talking about needing $40,000 to launch your dream business, I said, my voice gentle, devoid of malice but firm. About how hard it is to get funding, about needing a break. I've been building my business, the one some of you called a hobby, for over 2 years. Working nights, weekends, putting everything I had into it. Learning, growing, pushing through when things were impossible. I paused, letting that sink in. Recently, I partnered with a major e-commerce platform. My business isn't small anymore. It's real. It's successful. And I received a significant payout from that partnership. I looked back at the silent crowd, then directly at Brooke. The letter explains it, I continued. For years, you've talked about your dreams, but you've waited for someone to hand them to you. To fund you, to give you the break. I stopped waiting. I built my own. That check, I gestured to the paper in her hand, $40,000. It's a portion of my success. Use it to actually build something, Brooke. To stop waiting and start doing. Or don't. That's your choice. My voice softened slightly, but the power behind it didn't diminish. But know this, I said, looking from Brooke to Mom Diane, to Dad Robert, and out at the sea of stunned faces. I am not who you said I was. I am not a failure. I never was. You just weren't looking. Mom Diane stammered, Scarlett, we always believed in you. But her voice lacked conviction. Dad Robert just kept staring, a look of regret etched on his face. Cousin Miles looked like he might faint. Sarah, the family friend, gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod and a look of genuine respect. I turned then, my task complete. I walked back to Caleb, who was watching me with wide, amazed eyes. He didn't understand the numbers or the business deal, but he understood the shift. He understood that his mom, the quiet one, had just done something momentous. Mom, he whispered as I reached him. Are we leaving now? Yes, honey, I said, bending down to kiss the top of his head. We are. We walked towards the elevator, the silence parting before us like water. People whispered my name, their voices hushed with disbelief. Dad Robert took a step towards me, his mouth opening, but I didn't stop. I met his eyes one last time. There was nothing left to say. Brooke was still sitting on the sofa, the check lying beside her like a dropped stone. As the elevator doors closed, sealing us away from the stunned crowd, I heard someone whisper, Did that just happen? Caleb squeezed my hand. That was cool, Mom, he said softly. You were really brave. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and unexpected. More than the check, more than the shock on their faces. Caleb's simple statement was my true reward. We drove home in comfortable silence. It wasn't the silence of being invisible anymore. It was the silence of finally being heard. That envelope wasn't just paper and ink. It was the culmination of years of unseen effort, a defiant statement against a lifetime of underestimation. I hadn't needed their approval to succeed. I just needed to believe in myself and do the work. The next morning, my phone was unusually quiet for a while. No group chat notifications, no passive-aggressive texts, just stillness. It was peaceful. I made pancakes for Caleb, adding extra chocolate chips, and we ate in our little kitchen flooded with morning sun. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the anxious pressure to prove anything. I had already done it. Around noon, the messages started trickling in. Mom Diane's were interesting. She posted photos from the party on Facebook, tagging me with captions like, "So proud of my incredible entrepreneurial daughter," and "My girl always surprises us." It was a transparent attempt to claim credit, but I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. The truth was out there. Dad Robert called later that day. His voice was hesitant, thick with emotion. He apologized for his silence over the years, for not standing up for me, for not seeing my strength. I told him I understood. He wasn't built for confrontation, but his regret felt genuine. The call that meant the most, aside from Caleb's words, was from Uncle Thomas. He didn't mention the money or the drama directly. He just said, "Scarlett, I heard. I'm proud of you." It was long overdue for them to see. His quiet validation from someone who had always been kind meant a great deal. The biggest shift, however, continued to come from Caleb. A few days later, he came home from school with a drawing. It was on construction paper, a bit smudged, with glitter glued unevenly. It showed a figure in a cape with written on it, standing tall, holding something rectangular, the check, and looking strong. Written in his careful 9-year-old handwriting were the words, "My mom is a superhero boss." I tucked him into bed that night and cried silently into his pillow for a few moments after he fell asleep. No amount of money, no business deal, no family validation could ever compare to knowing my son saw me as a fighter, a creator, a boss. Things with Brooke didn't magically fix overnight. She's still Brooke, ambitious, a little self-centered, used to being the shining star. But the next time I saw her, a few weeks later at another small family gathering, something was different. She was quieter around me. She didn't make any cutting remarks. She even approached me when we were alone for a moment. She didn't apologize in the way you see in movies. No tearful confessions. Instead, she awkwardly handed me a small, beautifully crafted candle. It was clear she'd bought it, not made it, but it was a nice one. Heard things are going really well with your business," she mumbled, avoiding my eyes. This looked nice. There was no dramatic hug, no declaration of sisterly love. But as I took the candle, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not quite respect, but maybe a dawning, complicated acknowledgement. She didn't mention the check, and I didn't either. It hung between us, unspoken, a new foundation. Perhaps, eventually, we could build something different on it. Maybe not a close sisterly bond, but a relationship where we saw each other, truly saw each other, as capable women who had found our own paths. That night at the party changed everything. Not just because of the money, but because I stopped being the quiet disappointment and became, in their eyes and my own, the woman who built her own success. The one who refused to shrink. Here's what I learned. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be powerful. You don't need permission or validation from others to build your dreams. And sometimes, the most impactful statement you can make is simply showing up as your true, strong, quietly resilient self. Your success is not an apology for who you are. It is a declaration of who you were always meant to be. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one envelope, and the courage to finally hand it over and speak your truth.